was healing, and he nodded while sliding the paper crane toward her, saying he made it himself because she had refused money. And she laughed softly, telling him he didn't owe her anything, but he insisted that debt was not always financial. And as they talked, she learned he had immigrated years earlier, built something powerful, something he never described directly. Yet his phone calls and the way people greeted him hinted at influence that stretched far beyond normal business. And she shared pieces of her own story. Growing up between continents, working endless shifts, sending money home, believing compassion was the only inheritance she could pass on, and he listened more than he spoke, occasionally asking questions that revealed he valued ordinary details like favorite food, music, or what she did on days off. And when she asked why he had said what he did the night before, he looked down at his hands and admitted he had spent his life surrounded by loyalty bought with fear. Never affection freely given, never intimacy. That wasn't transactional. And he feared he had forgotten how to be human, and Amara responded quietly that humanity wasn't lost. Only buried in kindness could uncover it slowly, and their conversation stretched until her pager beeped, calling her back to duty. But when she left, he remained seated, watching her go as though memorizing the moment, and over the following weeks he visited occasionally. Never demanding attention, simply sitting with her during breaks, bringing small things like coffee or books. And she began noticing how different he became around her, his guarded expression easing, his laughter rare but genuine, while outside the hospital whispers about escalating conflicts in the city grew louder. News reports mentioning unnamed figures, violence avoided at the last second. Deals shifting quietly, and one night Amara found him waiting near the entrance looking more exhausted than before, and he admitted someone close to him had betrayed him. That power attracted ambition, and for the first time he looked uncertain, asking her if she believed people could change. And she answered yes without hesitation, saying she saw it every day in patients fighting to live. And he nodded slowly as if anchoring himself to her certainty, and when he walked her to the bus stop, rain began again, mirroring the night they met. And he said he didn't want her involved in his world, yet he kept coming back because she reminded him of a life he never allowed himself to imagine. And she replied she wasn't trying to change him, only to treat him like anyone else. And that simple promise seemed to mean more than anything else he had heard, and as the bus arrived, he stepped back, watching until she disappeared, feeling something unfamiliar growing, something softer than fear, something he didn't yet have a name for. The call came just before dawn when the emergency department erupted into motion after multiple injured men were rushed in, and Amara's heart dropped when she saw him among them, conscious but pale, refusing sedation while asking specifically for her. And she pushed aside personal emotion to focus on treatment, cleaning deeper wounds, instructing others calmly. And during a quiet moment, he caught her wrist lightly and whispered that he had tried to end a conflict peacefully, but someone chose violence, and she told him to conserve strength, reminding him he wasn't alone. And the hours that followed blurred into steady care, her presence constant, his breathing gradually stabilizing. And when the crisis passed, he looked at her with gratitude so intense it almost frightened her. And he admitted he had always believed strength meant never needing anyone. Yet she had shown him another form of power, one rooted in compassion, and she replied softly that survival wasn't just about force but about connection. And he closed his eyes briefly as if accepting that truth. And outside the hospital, sunlight finally broke. Occasionally admitted confusion about simple social customs he had never needed before, and she found herself guiding him gently, not as someone trying to reshape him, but as someone offering perspective. And one evening, he invited her to walk through a quiet riverside path near the hospital. Public and safe, emphasizing he didn't want her to feel uncomfortable, and she agreed, sensing he was making an effort to meet her world halfway. And as they walked beneath streetlights reflecting off the water, he spoke about letting go of certain alliances, about redistributing money toward community projects anonymously, and she was surprised, asking why anonymously, and he answered that recognition would tie those acts back to fear, whereas anonymity allowed kindness to exist without obligation. And she nodded, understanding the deeper significance. And they continued walking until the air grew colder, and before parting he hesitated, then admitted he didn't know what their connection meant, but he valued it deeply, and she replied that sometimes meaning didn't need definition, only honesty, and he accepted that with a quiet breath. And as days turned into weeks, the city's news began shifting subtly, reports of declining violence, rumors of changing power structures, and Amara wondered how much of it connected to him, though she never asked directly, preferring to let actions speak. And one night during a particularly exhausting shift, she found him waiting in the cafeteria again, holding 2 cups of coffee, and she laughed softly at the familiarity, and they sat together sharing small talk that gradually deepened into reflections about identity, belonging, and the courage required to step outside roles imposed by circumstance. And he admitted he sometimes feared losing authority by showing compassion, and she countered that true authority came from respect, not intimidation, and he absorbed her words thoughtfully. And later, when she walked him to the entrance, he thanked her not dramatically but sincerely, and she realized their relationship had evolved into something built on mutual trust rather than curiosity. And as he stepped into the night, he looked back once, as though anchoring himself to her presence. And she watched until he disappeared, feeling both warmth and uncertainty, aware that their paths were still unfolding in unpredictable ways. And though neither spoke of the future, both sensed that something quietly transformative continued to grow between them. Shaped not by grand gestures, but by consistent, human kindness shared in ordinary moments that gradually softened the edges of 2 very different lives. The first sign that something had shifted came not from Minye but from the hospital itself, because Amara noticed new donations appearing quietly, updated equipment delivered without fanfare, a renovated pediatric waiting room, fresh chairs in the oncology ward, and no one could trace the source. Yet she recognized the pattern of anonymous kindness and felt a quiet certainty about who stood behind it. And when she finally saw him again, it was late evening, the corridors calm, the fluorescent lights humming softly as he leaned against the vending machine like an ordinary visitor. And she approached with a tired smile, asking if he had been responsible for the changes, and he shrugged lightly, refusing confirmation, but the faint curve of his lips told her enough, and they walked slowly through the hallway, passing families, nurses, and doctors who barely noticed them. And he told her he had begun stepping away from decisions that once defined his life, delegating authority to people he trusted to handle things with less aggression, and she listened carefully, aware that transformation was rarely simple. And when she asked if he felt lighter, he paused before answering that he felt uncertain, like someone learning to walk without armor. And she told him uncertainty often meant growth. And he absorbed that quietly, and he admitted he had begun imagining a future he never considered before, one not shaped by survival but by connection. And she smiled gently, telling him that future was already beginning, and he looked at her with quiet gratitude. And though neither spoke further, the shared silence carried a sense of understanding, something steady and warm, continuing to grow between them as the night deepened, the clinic behind them standing as proof that compassion, once planted, could reshape lives in ways neither of them had expected. The winter air arrived quietly, bringing colder mornings and longer nights, and the clinic's waiting room filled faster than before. People seeking warmth as much as care, and Amara moved through her routines with practiced confidence. Yet she noticed how often Min Yi appeared during the busiest hours, not intruding but helping in subtle ways, carrying boxes, guiding patients, occasionally making tea for those waiting. And each small gesture revealed how naturally he had stepped into a different version of himself. One shaped by patience rather than control, and one evening after closing they remained inside longer than usual, reviewing supply lists while snow began to fall lightly outside, the first of the season, and he watched the flakes through the window as though seeing something new. And she teased him for being fascinated, and he admitted he rarely slowed down enough to notice details like this. And they stood quietly until he spoke about a lingering challenge, explaining that some of his former associates were unhappy with his changes, not openly hostile, but unsettled. Unsure of their place, and she listened, sensing the weight behind his calm tone, and she asked whether he felt threatened, and he answered that he felt responsible because leadership meant guiding others even when paths changed. And she told him transformation often required patience, not only with oneself but with others. And he nodded thoughtfully, And over the following days, he seemed more introspective, occasionally distracted during conversations. And Amara recognized the familiar tension of someone balancing past and future. And one afternoon, she found him sitting alone in the clinic courtyard, hands clasped, and she joined him without speaking, allowing silence to settle. And after a moment, he confessed he feared losing the trust he had built with her if his past resurfaced. And she answered gently that trust wasn't fragile glass, but something resilient when nurtured honestly, and he looked at her with quiet relief. And later that evening, they walked along the river again, the water dark beneath streetlights, and he admitted he had begun mentoring some younger men from his organization, encouraging them to pursue education or different work. And she smiled, saying he was paying forward the compassion he had received, and he reflected that kindness created ripples he never anticipated. And as they reached the bridge, they paused, watching cars pass in slow streams, and he asked whether she ever regretted becoming involved in his life. And she answered honestly that she had worried at first, but now believed their connection had brought growth to both of them, and he accepted her words quietly. And as winter deepened, the clinic expanded hours, volunteers rotating shifts, and Min Yi's presence became part of the rhythm. Not extraordinary anymore, but expected. And one night, a young boy arrived with his mother, frightened and shivering, and Min Yi knelt to reassure him while Amara prepared treatment. And she noticed how naturally he comforted the child, his voice gentle. And afterward, she told him he had a calming effect. And he admitted he was learning from her example, and she laughed softly. And when the last patient left, they stepped outside into the cold breath visible in the air, and he handed her another paper crane, this one carefully folded from plain white paper, and she asked why he continued making them, and